Okay, hi, welcome back to Comparative Politics. I'm a couple days late on these snippets, but we are diving into Chapter 1. I'm going to have a few of those over the course of the next 12 to 24 hours that I'm posting. This is the first one, and this coincides with much of Chapter 1. So this video itself should be a useful supplement, enhancement on the text, which you've already all read because you're all wonderful students. Something like that. If you haven't read the text yet, do so quickly. The first thing I want to do, as the book does, is to settle on some rough general definitions for some extremely important concepts. These are extremely important concepts in this course, but also really all of political science, and I would argue life itself. And the first one is politics itself. How do you define it? Well, we all sort of know what it is, right? It's one of those things. You know what it is, but if you had to define it, how would you put it? The book gives, I think, maybe one or more, obviously one, but there may be a few different definitions in the book. I'm not bothered by which ones you use. I don't need a regurgitation of the definitions. What I would like is for you all to be comfortable with just the general definition, have a good, solid understanding of what the word is. But the book definition for politics is basically power struggle, the struggle for power within any group that results in one or more people having the ability to make decisions for the larger group. Okay, so what are we to make of that? The struggle, well, one thing I want you to get is power, and we're going to define that next. Power is the key to the concept of politics within any group. That means when you hear the phrase office politics, I hate office politics, or we've got office politics going on, or any version of that, that's being used very accurately. If you're fighting over food in the refrigerator in your office, that's office politics. We're going to be looking at, of course, more of the standard version of it, the governmental stuff, but that's what we mean by political, is this struggle for control. So now let's look at power. Okay, we all know what that is. How would we define it? If we were in class, I'd ask you to raise your hands, and you'll bravely raise your hands, and you give me wonderful, excellent examples, definitions of power, right? But and the book, again, gives you a few different ones. But essentially, it's getting people to do what they otherwise would not do. Power is the ability to get someone to do, someone or some people, some group of people, to do something that they otherwise would not do. Okay? And that can have, obviously, there's power throughout society. We have power struggles every day in our lives, maybe with our family and friends, in households. Getting my stepdaughter to sit on the couch and eat chocolate with me may not be an example of power, because she might otherwise do that, right? Getting my son to take out the trash might be an example of power, because he's not otherwise going to want to do that. That's essentially the concept. It's this ability to get people to do what you want them to do. That's what power is. Now the next thing is, what is comparative politics? Well, when I talk about comparative politics, I'm talking about a subfield of political science that's not as old as political science. And political science itself specifically is not really that old either. We're talking, roughly 100 years. Comparative politics is, a few decades younger than that. But it's essentially a systematic way of examining the world through the comparative method in order to answer important open questions. Open questions, as opposed to closed questions. It's an important difference. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. A lot of times there's gray area. But an open question is one for which we don't yet know the answer. We don't yet properly agree on the answer. There's no scientific consensus to what the answer is. A lot of questions in life are open when you think about it. There are some closed questions. Raise your hand. Give me an example. Does the Earth revolve around the sun? This is a closed question. We know the correct answer to that. Okay. Some people would argue, flat earthers, etc., might argue otherwise, but here's the key: they're wrong, and we know they're wrong. Okay. Peep Show. It's a very funny British TV show, but it's not for everybody, and it's definitely not suitable for work. Okay, so back to that. So, what are open questions that the field seeks to answer? What kind of government works best? Okay, right? Comparative government and politics. You're comparing types of governments. Why do some states develop better and more quickly than other states? States. That's chapter 2. And this is the first instance where I'm going to use it like comparativist, and it can be a little bit confusing here because I'm not using it in the sense that we use in the United States, not like New Mexico, okay, or Texas, or a Mexican state, for example, Guadalajara, not those kind of states, countries. Well, in chapter 2, we'll see what's the difference between a country and a state, and it can be a little weird and complicated, and it's not at all important now. But generally, when I talk about states, I'm going to be actually talking about what normal people call countries. All right. Why are some states more successful than others? A lot of comparative politics is about trying to explain success and failure. And that's a really judgy word, failure, but relative lack of success, you can call it if you want. A lot of states try very hard to get things right, and they don't do it. They don't succeed. They don't reach their goals. That's what we mean there. We don't mean that everybody has to do it the same way, and if you're not like the United States, then you're doing something wrong. That's definitely not what we mean by failure in that instance. What's the best approach to immigration? This is a comparative, an open question that comparative politics can shed light on. What's the best approach to preventing, avoiding, prosecuting corruption, terrorism? These are comparative questions. How do you balance freedom and equality? Upcoming snippet on that. Oh, you don't. You have them both, freedom and equality. Well, what we're going to see in the next snippet and throughout this course is that a lot of times they are actually at odds. And that's the way they've been traditionally viewed within the discipline, and that's the way states are thinking when they make their decision. An attempt to reconcile conflict between freedom and equality. And that's a huge issue. Taxation. What's the best way to get the taxes, and what's the best way to spend taxation, tax money, tax revenues? Individual and group rights, what should they be? Occasionally, those come into conflict. We'll see about that in future chapters. But that's a big part of comparative politics. All right, now moving on. I want to very quickly look at the history of the field. This is discussed in the book, but essentially, as I mentioned, political science isn't that old. Thinking and talking about politics is age-old. It's always been around. You hear about Aristotle, but he wasn't the first. But, that's going back a long ways, Aristotle, right? These are generally what we call political philosophers, not political scientists. So political science itself was a 20th century attempt to kind of bring the study of politics in with other behavioral sciences. And there have been different sort of forms or paradigms within political science. I'll skip the history of it, except to say over the last 20 or so years, a dominant school of thought within political science has been institutions. So we're going to look at that later on. What do we mean by institutions? But the weakness and strength of institutions is used to explain success and failure in comparative government and politics. So, those are a few things that I wanted to point out in this sort of introduction to Chapter 1, and I'll be coming next with a few more snippets that relate directly to Chapter 1 and also the rest of the course. So, see you later.